inner aspect of the earth embodiment of the earth. We have placed before our souls a series of observations showing that the spiritual stands behind everything that we call Maya, or the great illusion. Today let us ask ourselves once more, how do we come to know that behind all that surrounds us, from the perspective of our senses and our understanding of the cosmos as it is conveyed through our physical bodies, the spiritual is discernible? We were able to characterize the spiritual in the course of our previous explorations because we insisted on putting aside the immediate outward appearances of the world and penetrating the qualities of true reality, which we identified as the willingness to sacrifice, the virtue of bestowing, and resignation or renunciation, qualities we could come to know only if we looked into our own souls, qualities, in fact, that we could comprehend and receive only in the context of our own souls. In other words, if we want to understand those qualities that we presume embody what is real and true behind the world of illusion, and if we wish to understand them in their true nature, we must say, this world of true being or existence, this world of reality, contains real live qualities or characteristics that we may compare only with qualities we can perceive within our own soul. If, for example, we wish to characterize what expresses itself outwardly in the appearance of warmth, characterizing it in relationship to its true nature as sacrificial service, as sacrifice streaming into the world, we must lead the element of warmth back to the spiritual, at the same time eliminating the external veil of existence, thereby demonstrating that this quality in the outer world is recognizable as the same as our own spiritual nature. Before continuing our observations, we must consider another idea. Does everything that we find in the world of Maya really disappear into a kind of nothingness? Is there really nothing in the world of sense perception and outward understanding that corresponds, as it were, to what is true or real? The following would be a good comparison. We may say that just as the inner powers of a stream, or indeed of the ocean itself, lie concealed within the watery mass, the world of truth or reality lies initially hidden. Therefore we may say that the world of Maya may be compared with the rippling play of waves on the water's surface. The comparison is good because it shows us that something does indeed flow upward out of the depths of the ocean, causing the rippling waves on the surface. It shows us, too, that this something is the substantiality of the water and a certain configuration of its forces. But whether we use this or that comparison is unimportant. We still must pose the question, is there something in the broad realm of Maya that really exists? Today I want to proceed as we did in the previous lectures. We will gradually approach what we wish to place before our soul, taking soul experiences as our starting point. Having progressed spiritually through the Saturn, Sun, and Moon existences, we have now reached the Earth existence. Thus we shall begin with even more familiar, one could even say more common, experiences of the soul than we did last time. Last time we worked out of the hidden depths of soul life, out of what arises in what spiritual science calls our astral body. There we felt longing stirring, and we saw how longing worked within a being, in this case the human being. We saw, too, how such longing in soul life could be alleviated only in a world of pictures. We came to understand the world of pictures as the inner movement in soul life, and thereby we found our way from the microcosm of the individual soul to the macrocosm of world creation, which we attributed to the spirits of movement. Today, then, I would take as our starting point a familiar soul experience that was already known and alluded to ancient Greece, and is today still very meaningful in its truthfulness. This experience is hinted at in the words, "All philosophy, that is, all striving toward a certain human knowledge, arises out of wonder." This formulation is in fact correct. Is a footnote, see Plato, Theaetetus 155c, and Aristotle Metaphysics 982b, end of footnote. Whoever reflects a little and pays attention to the process one experiences in one's soul as one approaches some kind of learning will already have discovered that a healthy path to knowledge always has its origin in wonder, or in wondering about something. Amazement and wonder, out of which all learning processes arise, belong precisely among those soul experiences that elevate and bring life to all that is dull, empty, and dry. For what sort of knowledge would it be that took a place in our soul, yet did not arise from wonder? It would certainly be a kind of knowledge that was immersed in emptiness and pedantry. Only that soul process, leading from wonder to the bliss we experience in solving a riddle, thus raising itself beyond wonder, only that soul process, beginning in wonder, ennobles and gives inner liveliness to learning. You should actually try to feel the dryness of knowledge that is not saturated with these inner feelings. The context of true healthy knowledge is the wonder and delight that solving a riddle engenders. Other kinds of knowledge can be acquired from outside and can be applied on some basis or other. Nevertheless, in all seriousness, any knowledge that is not embraced by these two feelings does not really spring from the human soul. All the quote-unquote aroma of knowledge that the atmosphere of the living element in knowledge creates arises out of these two things, wonder and delight over gratified wonder. But what kind of origin does wonder itself have? Why does wonder, that is, amazement about something external, arise in the soul? Wonder and astonishment arise because we stand before some being or thing or fact and feel strangely delighted by it. This strangeness is the first element that leads to wonder and surprise. But we do not feel wonder or amazement about everything that is strange to us. We experience wonder toward something strange only if at the same time we also feel related to it. We could describe this feeling as follows. There is something in this thing or being that is not yet a part of me, but which could become a part of me. When we perceive something with wonder and astonishment, we feel that it is strange and at the same time related to us. This word wonder is connected with the word astonishment. Something is added to the phenomenon of wonder to which one can find no cognitive relationship. But that can only be the fault of the individual. At least the responsibility ought to rest with the person. And a person would not approach that something wondrous in a spirit of rejection or denial unless he or she had concluded that the thing or event ought to be related to him or her. For why do those who operate out of materialistic or purely intellectual concepts deny, for example, what others recognize as a wonder, if they do not have direct evidence that it is a lie or an untruth? Even philosophers today have to admit that one can never prove on the basis of phenomena spread out before humanity in the world that the Christ who incarnated in Jesus of Nazareth was not resurrected from the dead. Arguments can be made against this assertion, but what are these arguments? In terms of logic, they are untenable. Enlightened philosophers today already admit that. Enlightened philosophers today already admit that. For the arguments that can be brought forward on the materialistic side, for example, that no one until now has seen anyone arise from the dead as Christ arose from the dead, these arguments are logically at the same level as the argument that someone who had only seen fish must conclude that there are no birds. One can never derive in a logically consistent way, on the basis of the existence of one class of beings, that other beings do not exist. Likewise, one cannot derive anything about the event of Golgotha, which must be described as a wonder, on the basis of human experiences on the physical plane. However, if you tell someone about something that one would have to call a miracle, even though it were true, and the person says, "I cannot understand it," then that person is not opposing what we have said about the concept of astonishment, because this person is in fact showing that the same starting point for all knowledge also holds true for him or herself. That person is demanding that your statement find an echo within him or herself. In a certain sense, this individual wants to own, spiritually or cognitively, what is being communicated. And since that person does not believe this is possible, and that it has no relationship to him or her, such a person declines to accept it. Although we can arrive at the concept of wonder on our own, we should also acknowledge that amazement and astonishment, from the perspective of all ancient Greek philosophy, arise when human beings come face to face with something strange, and yet must time recognize at the same something related or familiar there. Let me read that sentence again. I believe there's some mix-up in the words. Although we can arrive at the concept of wonder on our own, we should also acknowledge that amazement and astonishment, from the perspective of all ancient Greek philosophy, arise when human beings come face to face with something strange, and yet must at the same time recognize as related or familiar. Let us now try to build a bridge between these concepts and those that we brought before our souls last time. We demonstrated last time how a certain advance in evolution was brought about by beings who were ready to offer sacrifices, and by other beings' refusal to receive these offerings, and the return of the sacrifices to the beings who offered them. We recognized in the returned sacrifices one of the main factors in ancient moon development. Indeed, one of the most significant aspects of ancient moon development is that certain beings brought sacrifices to higher beings, who then returned the sacrifices. Because of this, as the smoke from the offering of the moon beings pressed upward toward the higher beings who would not accept the sacrifices, the smoke was guided back as substance into the beings who had wanted to offer the sacrifice. We have seen, too, that the beings of the ancient moon are most distinctive in that they felt pressing back into themselves what they had wished to send up to higher beings as the substance of sacrifice. Yes, truly, we have seen that the substance that sought to become part of the higher beings was not able to do so, remained behind. Read that again. Yes, truly, we have seen that the substance that sought to become part of the higher beings, but was not able to do so, remained behind in the very beings who sent it forth, and that thereby the capacity for longing arose in these beings who had offered a sacrifice that was rejected. Indeed, we have even now, in all that we experience as longing in our own soul, a legacy of the event on the ancient moon, a legacy from beings who discovered that their sacrifice had not been accepted. The whole character of ancient moon development, its spiritual atmosphere, when understood from a spiritual perspective, may be characterized by the fact that beings existed then who wished to present their sacrifice, but found that their offering was not accepted, because the higher beings waived any claim to the sacrifice. Such is the peculiarly melancholic cause behind the characteristic atmosphere of the ancient moon, rejected sacrifice, and Cain's rejected sacrifice, which points symbolically to the starting point for the evolution of earthly humankind, appears as a kind of recapitulation of this fundamental principle in ancient moon development that took hold of Cain's soul. Cain, who also saw that his sacrifice was not accepted. Just as in the case of the beings of ancient moon existence, such a rejection is something that can create a sorrow, a pain in us that gives birth to longing. We saw last time that the entry of the spirits of movement on the ancient moon created a balance or redress between this rejected sacrifice and the longing that arose in the beings when the sacrifice was not accepted. At least the possibility was created whereby the longing that arose in the beings whose sacrifice was rejected could be satisfied to some extent. Imagine in the most lively way the following. You have the higher beings to whom sacrifice should be given, but who sent back the substance of the sacrifice. Longing arises in those beings who wanted to make the sacrifice and now feel, quote, if I had been able to give my sacrifice to the higher beings, the best of my own being would be living in those beings. Indeed, I myself would be living within those higher beings. But because I have been excluded from these beings, I stand here, and the higher beings stand over there. Unquote. The spirits of movement, however, and we should understand this almost literally, now bring these beings, in whom longing from the rejected sacrifice gleams toward the higher beings, into positions from which they can approach the higher beings from many different sides. And what rests in these beings as rejected offering is balanced, compensated for by the wealth of impressions received from the higher beings, encircling those who offer the rejected sacrifice. Thus a relationship is created between the beings who wished to offer the sacrifice and the higher beings who rejected it. And what remained unsatisfied because of the return of the offering can be compensated for in their new relation, so that it is as if the sacrifice had been accepted. We can clarify what is meant here if we visualize the higher beings symbolically as the sun, and then, in a single position, the lesser beings gathered together as a planet. Let us suppose that the beings of the lesser planet wished to present their sacrifice to the higher planet, that is, to the sun, but the sun returned it, and the substance of the sacrifice must remain with the beings who offered the sacrifice. In their solitude and separation, these beings are filled with longing. Then the spirits of movement bring them into a circuit moving around the higher beings. Instead of sending forth a flow of the substance of sacrifice directly to the higher beings, it is possible for the beings who now contain the sacrifice within themselves to bring the substance into movement around the higher beings, thereby bringing the sacrifice into relation with the beings of a higher nature. It is just as if a person cannot appease a profound longing through one great fulfillment, but experiences instead a series of partial gratifications. That person's whole soul is brought into motion by such a series of partial gratifications. We described this very precisely the last time. We saw that because a being cannot feel inwardly united with the higher beings in sacrifice, impressions coming from without arise as a substitute. These substitute gratifications show us how such beings are able to achieve partial satisfaction. Yet it is undeniable that the intended sacrifice would have had a different form in the higher beings than it had when it remained within the lower beings. For the actual conditions necessary for that intended form of existence lay in the higher beings. The conditions of existence in the lower beings are different from those within the higher beings. Once again, we can imagine this pictorially. If the entire substance of a planet flowed into the sun, and the sun did not reject it, the beings of this planet, as sun beings, would discover different conditions of existence than they would if the sun had returned the substance back to the planet. An alienation of what we must call the content of the sacrifice takes place through its rejection, an alienation of this substance of the sacrifice from its origin. Consider this thought. Beings are forced to retain something within themselves that they would gladly present as a sacrifice, and that they feel could fulfill its true purpose only if it could be presented as an offering. If you could recreate the experience of such beings, you would have what one may call, quote, the exclusion of a certain portion of cosmic beings from their own essential meaning and great cosmic purpose, unquote. Beings have something within themselves that would actually, if we may speak pictorially, only fulfill its purpose in another place. Consequently, this displacement of the rejected sacrifice's smoke, this displacement of the rejected substance of sacrifice, removes this sacrificial substance from the course of the rest of the cosmic process. If you grasp this thought, not just with your intellect, for the intellect does not work in such matters, but if you grasp what is being expressed with your feeling, you will experience something like being torn out of the universal cosmic process. For the beings who rejected the sacrifice, it is just something they have pushed away from themselves. But for the other beings, those in whom the substance of the sacrifice remains, it is something that bears the imprint of alienation from one's own origin. Here, then, we have beings whose substantiality expresses alienation from one's origins. If one understands this sensitively, if one places sensitively before one's soul this idea of something in which alienation from its origins dwells, then one has the idea of death. Death in the universe is nothing other than what had to occur within the beings whose sacrifice was rejected, and who had to retain that sacrifice within themselves. Thus we advance from resignation and renunciation, which we found in the third stage of evolution, to what was refused by the higher beings, death. And the true meaning of death is nothing other than the state of not being in one's true place, of being excluded from one's true place. Even when death occurs concretely in human life, the same principle holds true. For when we look at a corpse left in the world of Maya, it consists only of a substantiality that has been separated at the moment of death from the I, the astral body, and the etheric body, and has thereby been alienated from what gave it as physical body its only real significance. For the physical body of a human being has no meaning without the etheric body, the astral body, and the I. At the moment of death, the physical body becomes meaningless. It is excluded from its source of meaning. When a person dies, what is no longer sense-perceptible presents itself to us in the macrocosm. Because cosmic beings in higher spheres gave back what was intended to be brought to them as sacrifice, this rejected substance of sacrifice became subject to death. For death is the exclusion of cosmic substance or a cosmic being from its true purpose. With this we come to the spiritual nature of what we call the fourth element in the universe. If fire is in the purest sense sacrifice, and wherever fire or warmth occurs, sacrifice lies spiritually behind it, if, behind everything that is spread out around our earth as air, we discover gift-granting or bestowing virtue, if we can characterize flowing water, that is, the fluid element, as spiritual resignation or renunciation, then we must characterize the element of earth as the only bearer of death, as that which has been alienated from its meaning through rejection. Death would not exist if there were no element of earth. Here you have in concrete form something that shows how the solid arises out of the fluid, and this too, in a certain way, reflects a spiritual process. Imagine, for instance, that ice forms in a pond, thus making the water become solid. What causes the water to turn to ice, in fact, cuts the water off from what gives it meaning as water. In this process you have the spiritual manifestation of becoming solid, the spiritual manifestation of becoming earth. For with regard to the characteristics of the four elements, ice is actually earth. Only what is fluid is water. Being separated from one's purpose and meaning is what we call death, and death presents and fulfills itself in the element of earth. We began by posing the question whether anything real could be found in our world of illusion or Maya, whether anything within it corresponds to reality. Consider very carefully the concept we have now placed before our soul. I told you at the beginning that the concepts in these lectures are rather complicated. Therefore we must not just accept them intellectually. We must meditate upon them. Only then will they become clear to us. Let us take this concept of death, that is, the concept of what is earth-related, for it presents a truly remarkable aspect. Of all the other concepts that we dealt with, we had to say that there was no reality in what we find around us in the world of Maya, that what is true is only to be found in the fundamentally spiritual. But here we have ascertained that something in the sphere of Maya characterizes itself as death, precisely because it is separated from its purpose, and because it actually ought to be in the spiritual realm. In other words, something is cut off and confined within this Maya. It actually should not be there. Throughout the entire vast realm of Maya or illusion, we have only deceptions and delusions. Nevertheless, we do find something in Maya that corresponds to what is true, namely, that in the moment something true is cut off from what gives it meaning in the spiritual, it becomes subject to destruction and death. Here we have nothing less than the great truth that within the world of Maya, the only thing that shows itself in its reality is death. All other appearances we must trace back to their reality. What is true lies behind all other appearances that arise in Maya. Only death is to be found in Maya in its reality, for it consists of what is separated from the real and taken into Maya. Thus, in the whole sphere of Maya, death is the only reality. And so, if we turn from what spreads out everywhere in universal Maya to the great principles of the cosmos, a most important, most pertinent consequence presents itself for spiritual science in the following proposition. In our world of Maya, only death actually exists as something real. We can also approach what I want to say here from another side. We can, for example, consider the beings of other realms that are here around us. We can ask, do minerals, for example, die? For the occultist, it is meaningless to say that minerals die, for that would be similar to saying that a fingernail that has been cut has died. The fingernail is not something that in and of itself has a right to its own existence. It is a part of us, and when we cut the nail, we separate it from us and tear it away from the life it shared with us. It dies only when we ourselves die. In the same sense, for spiritual science, minerals do not die, for minerals are only members of a great organism, just as the fingernail is a member of our organism. And when a mineral seems to be destroyed, it is merely torn from the greater organism, as the piece of fingernail is separated from our organism when we cut it. The destruction of minerals is not death, for a mineral does not live in and of itself. Rather, it lives within the greater organism of which it is a member. If you recall my lecture on the nature of plants, you will know that the plant as such is not independent either. The plant, too, is a member of the entire earth organism, but not quite in the way that minerals are part of a larger organism. From a spiritual scientific point of view, it is meaningless to speak of the life of an individual plant. One must rather speak of the earth organism, for plants are everywhere parts of this organism. When we come to the death of plants, the situation is similar to cutting a fingernail. We cannot say that the fingernail has died. The same is true of plants, for they belong to the greater organism, which is identical with the entire earth. The earth is an organism. It goes to sleep in spring, sending the plants as its organs out toward the sun. In fall, the earth reawakens and spiritually receives the plants back into itself by accepting their seeds into its being. It is meaningless to view the plants individually, for the earth organism as a whole does not die, even though individual plants wilt. Similarly, when our hair turns gray, we do not die, even though we cannot turn our gray hair black again, at least not by any natural means. Of course, we are in a different position than the plants, but the earth may be compared to a human being who can turn gray hair back into black hair. The earth itself does not die. What we see in wilting plants is a process that takes place on the earth's surface. Although they wilt, however, we can never say that plants truly die. Neither can we say of the animals that they die as we do, for the individual animal does not truly exist. Only the group soul of the animal exists within the supersensible. What the animal really is, its true existence, exists only on the astral plane as the group soul. The individual animal is densified out of the group soul. And when the animal dies, it is set aside as a member of the group soul and is then replaced by another. What we encounter as death in the mineral, plant, and animal realms is therefore only the semblance, the illusion of death. In reality, only the human being dies, for the human being has developed individuality so far that it descends into the physical body, in which a person must carry out an earthly existence in order to be real. Death has meaning only for the human being during earthly existence. To grasp this, we must say, only human beings can actually experience death. Moreover, as we learn from spiritual scientific research, only human beings can really overcome death. Only for us is true victory over death possible. For all other beings, death is only apparent. It does not really exist. If we were to ascend beyond humanity to beings of the higher hierarchies, we would discover that the higher beings do not know death in the human sense. True death, that is, death in the physical realm, is only experienced by those beings who have to draw something out of existence in the physical plane. Human beings must achieve I consciousness in the physical context, and that cannot be found without death. Neither for beings who stand in rank below the human being, nor for beings who stand above the human being, is it meaningful to speak of death. On the other hand, there is no undoing the most significant earthly deed of the being whom we call the Christ being. Indeed, with regard to the Christ being, we have seen that the mystery of Golgotha, the victory of life over death, becomes the most important event of all. And where can this victory over death be carried out? Can it occur in higher worlds? No. For among the lower beings to whom we referred, in the mineral, plant, and animal realms, we cannot speak of death, because these beings actually have their true being in the higher world beyond the senses. And with regard to higher beings, one cannot speak of death, but only of transformation, metamorphosis, and reordering. The incision into life that we call death occurs only with the human state, and human beings can experience death only in the physical context. If human beings had never entered the physical plane, they would never have known death, for a being who has not entered the physical plane knows nothing of death. There is nothing in other worlds that may be called death. In other worlds, there is only transformation and metamorphosis. If the Christ had to go through death, then he had to descend to the physical realm, for he could experience death only in the physical realm. Thus we see that the reality of higher worlds works in Maya in a remarkable way in the historical development of the human being. If we are thinking of historical events in the right way, we must realize that although an event occurs in the physical realm, its source lies in the spiritual world. This is true of all historical events, except one. For we cannot say of the event at Golgotha that it occurred on the physical plane and something corresponding to it exists in a higher world. True, Christ himself belongs to the higher world and descended to the physical plane, but an archetype, such as we have for all other historical events, does not exist for what was accomplished at Golgotha. The mystery of Golgotha could occur only in the physical realm. Evidence for this will be provided out of spiritual science. For instance, in the course of the next 3,000 years, there will be many new examples of the event at Damascus. We have often spoken of this. Human beings will develop capacities so that they will be able to perceive the Christ on the astral plane as an etheric figure, as Paul did at Damascus. This experience of perceiving Christ through higher capacities, which will develop more and more among human beings in the course of the next 3 millennia, will begin in our 20th century. From this time onward, these capacities will gradually emerge, and over the next millennia they will be cultivated by a great number of human beings. That is, many people will come to know that Christ is a reality, that he lives by looking into higher worlds. They will become acquainted with him as he lives now. Nor will they become acquainted only with how he now lives. Rather, they will become convinced, precisely as Paul was, that he died and rose again. The basis for this, however, cannot be found in higher worlds. It must be found on the physical plane. If a person today comes to understand and grasp how Christ's own development progresses, and how, with it, certain human capacities also develop, if a person understands this through spiritual science, then there is nothing to prevent this person, when they pass through the portal of death, from participating in the Damascus event. For death now actually manifests as an initial shining forth of Christ into the world of humanity. Those who prepare themselves today for this event, while in the physical body, can also experience it in the life between death and new birth. Those, however, who do not prepare themselves for it, who gain no understanding of it in this incarnation, can know nothing during the life between death and a new birth of what is already happening now, and for the next 3,000 years will continue to happen in relation to Christ. They will have to wait until they are incarnated again. Then, when they are on earth again, they will have to make further preparation for it. The death on Golgotha and what was created out of that death, which was needed to bring about the whole of Christ's subsequent development on earth, can be grasped only in the physical body. It is the only important fact for our higher life that must be grasped in the physical body. Once understood in the physical body, it will be worked on further, cultivated more in the higher worlds. But first it must be understood in the physical body. The mystery of Golgotha could never have occurred in the higher worlds, and has no archetype in the higher worlds. It is an event that encompasses a death confined entirely within the physical realm. Therefore it can only be understood within the context of the physical plane. Yes, it is one of the tasks of the human being on earth to achieve this understanding in one of his or her incarnations. Here we must say, therefore, that we have found something significant on the physical plane that demonstrates an immediate reality, an immediate truth. What is it that is real on the physical plane? What on the physical plane is so real that we stop short and say, here we have something that is true? It is death in the world of humankind, but not death in the other realms of nature. To understand the historical events that occur in the course of earthly evolution, we must rise from the historical event to the spiritual archetype. But this is not the case with the mystery of Golgotha. In the mystery of Golgotha, we have something that belongs immediately and directly to the world of reality. The other side of what has just been said also manifests itself. This is extraordinarily interesting. It is most significant that we find that the event at Golgotha is denied nowadays to be a real event, and that if we are talking of outward history, people say that it is impossible to prove this event as historical fact. Among momentous historical facts, there is really one that is so difficult to prove through external, historically verifiable means. Let me read that again. Among momentous historical facts, there is rarely one that is so difficult to prove through external, historically verifiable means as the mystery of Golgotha. Compared to this, think how easy it is to work with the historical arguments for the existence of a Socrates or a Plato or some other Greek figure who is important for the progress of humanity in the outer world. Still, many people, up to a certain point justifiably, say, you cannot claim on the basis of history that Jesus of Nazareth actually lived. And yet contrary historical evidence does not exist. Nevertheless, it is true, one cannot deal with the fact of the mystery of Golgotha in the way that one deals with other historical facts. It is most remarkable that this event, which occurred on the outer physical plane, shares a common characteristic with all facts of the supersensible realm, namely that it does not allow itself to be proven in any outward way. And many of those people who deny the supersensible world are the same ones who lack the capacity to grasp this event, which is not at all a supersensible one. In fact, the reality of the event is supported by the effects it produces. Yet people suppose that these effects can occur without the real event itself actually having occurred historically. They explain that the effects are a consequence of sociological circumstances. But for someone who is familiar with the course of cosmic creation, the idea that the effects of Christianity could have occurred without a force standing behind them is about as clever as saying that cabbages can grow in a field without planting seeds. We can go even further and say that for the individuals who participated in the compilation of the Gospels, there was likewise no possibility of proving the historical event of the mystery of Golgotha as an historical fact based on historical evidence, for it took place without leaving traces perceivable by outward observation. Do you know how the compilers of the Gospels, with the exception of the author of the Gospel of St. John, who is a direct witness of these events, became convinced of the truth of these events? They were not persuaded by historical sources, for they had nothing more than the oral tradition in the books of the mysteries. These circumstances are outlined in my title, Christianity as Mystical Fact. They convinced themselves of the actual existence of Christ Jesus through the constellations of the stars, for they were still very learned about the relationship of the macrocosm to the microcosm. They had the knowledge, one can also have it today, with which one can calculate a significant point in world history through the constellations of the stars. They could say, when the constellations are thus and so, then that being who is described as the Christ must have lived on earth. In this way, the authors of the Gospels of St. Matthew, St. Mark, and St. Luke were persuaded about the historical events. They gained the substance of the Gospels through clairvoyance. But the conviction that this or that could have occurred on earth was drawn out of the constellations in the macrocosm. Anyone who knows this must believe the authors of the Gospels. Proving the inaccuracy of objections to the historicity of the Gospels is a thankless task. As anthroposophists, we must be clear that we place ourselves on an entirely different basis, the basis obtainable through insight into spiritual science. In this regard, I would also like to draw attention to something that I have tried to establish during these lectures. The realities of which anthroposophy speaks cannot be undermined or struck down by objections that are in and of themselves correct. Human beings can say a great deal that is correct according to their knowledge. That does not disprove spiritual science. In the lecture titled, How Does One Find a Basis for Theosophy?, I drew a comparison and said, a little boy used to go into the village to get rolls for his family for breakfast. Now, in that village, a roll cost 2 kreuzers, and the boy was always given 10 kreuzers. The boy brought home a number of rolls from the baker. One should note here that he was not a great arithmetician, and thought nothing more about it. Then a foster son was taken into the family, and he was sent to get the rolls from the baker instead of the other boy. The foster son was a good arithmetician, and so he said to himself, you go to buy rolls and take 10 kreuzers with you. A roll costs 2 kreuzers, and since 10 divided by 2 equals 5, you should bring home 5 rolls. But upon returning home, the boy discovered that he had brought 6 rolls. He said to himself, that's wrong. You can't buy that many rolls for 10 kreuzers, and since the addition is correct, tomorrow I expect to bring back 5 rolls. On the next day, he received again 10 kreuzers and again brought back 6 rolls. The addition was correct, but it did not correspond to the reality, for in fact the reality was different. It was the custom in that village that whoever bought 10 kreuzers worth of rolls received an extra roll. That is, one received 6 rolls instead of 5. The boy's calculation was correct, but still it did not correspond to the reality. Thus, the most critically thought-through objections to spiritual science can be correct, but they may not have anything to do with the reality, which may stand on quite different principles. This is a wonderful example with which to demonstrate, even theoretically, the difference between what is arithmetically correct and what is actually true. Thus, our efforts have shown that the world of Maya leads back to reality. This process has shown us that fire is sacrifice, that the airy element is flowing, giving, bestowing virtue, that everything fluid is the result of renunciation, resignation. Today, we have added to these 3 truths a fourth, that the true nature of the earth or solid element is death, the separation of a substance from its cosmic purpose. When this state of separation was initiated, death itself entered as a reality into the world of Maya or illusion. The gods themselves could never know death unless they descended in some way into the physical world, so as to understand death in its true nature in the physical world, the world of Maya or illusion. This is what I wanted to add to the concepts that we have discussed. Again, note that we can gain clarity about these concepts, so necessary, as we shall see, for a fundamental understanding of what is in the Gospel of St. Mark, only through disciplined meditation and by allowing them repeatedly to influence our soul. For the Gospel of Mark can be understood only if one lays a foundation in the most significant cosmic concepts.